Welcome, everyone. I'm Brent Prokosh, a senior consultant with Euroconsult, a leading global consulting firm specializing in space markets. And I'm very pleased to welcome you to the 12th edition of GVF's acclaimed webinar series, organized in association with Satellite Evolution and with the kind support of Proactive International PR, a global public relations consulting firm specialized in telecom and technology sectors. With much of the industry's attention focused on major geo satellite operators and emerging NGSO players, it'll be refreshing to hear from key regional operators in terms of their commercial, technology, and services strategies. With us are three panelists who will share their unique views on these topics today. We have Patrick French, the EVP of Global Business Development and Strategy at Asia Broadcast Satellite, ABS, Wael Al-Bouti, the VP and Chief Commercial Officer of Arabsat, and Dharmendra Singh, the EVP of Enterprise Sales at Yasat. So with that, I'll turn the conversation over to our panelists, letting them introduce themselves and basically teeing it up with the first question here. For you all. So maybe you can introduce yourselves quickly and your company, and then maybe share what the biggest opportunities or drivers for your business will be over the next 5 years as you see it. Dharmendra, would you like to start?
Sure. Thanks, Brent. Hello, everybody. Hope everybody's keeping well in these tragic times. As Brent introduced, I'm Dharmendra. I'm part of Yasat and looking after enterprise business, primarily selling in Middle East and African region. Just before I answer, maybe a couple of minutes on what we do at Yasat, Yaklik. So Yasat is a subsidiary of Muadla Group in UAE, and Yaklik is the service broadband service brand. It's been joint venture with Hughes Network Systems, which is one of the leader in providing consumer broadband services globally. Overall, from a Ka-band perspective, we have over 30 Gbps of capacity over Middle East and Africa, and we maintain leadership position in Ka-band capacity. We have a very young fleet of 5 satellites, and when it talks about the geo satellites, primarily delivering broadband, it is Alia 1, 2, and 3. And apart from that, we have Thuraya satellites, T1, T2. And our focus primarily, the BU, which I represent, is on Ka-band. And we also have access to some Ku-band capacity and some very good C-band capacity. And as far as global position is concerned, we are like world number 6 largest satellite operator by some parameter. And now coming back, that's a very high level, what we do at Yasat. And Brent, coming back to your question, basically, key opportunities are not very different for all the satellite operators. But what we see, opportunities are enormous, and primarily, we are focusing on consumer and SME broadband. We at Yaklik, we started focusing on consumer, but it's actually primarily SME broadband, high-speed connectivity that's driving most of our growth. Then the trend we are seeing is government-driven social inclusion programs, which are fueling a lot of opportunities in education, healthcare programs, and some government defense-related connectivity programs. A lot of rural GSM projects coming up, cellular backhauling, community Wi-Fi is a focused area for us. That also helps us monetize a chunk of the capacity. Financial inclusion program, though slow in adapting Ka-band, but we see a lot of positive trend, rural banking. And if you look at today and over next 5 years, we are going to pursue these opportunities, hoping that trends are not going to change significantly. The primary market remains pretty much same for everybody, South Africa, Nigeria, Congo, DRC, and we see Angola coming up significantly for us. And surprisingly, we are seeing a lot of opportunities in Cote d'Ivoire. And we are working on some strategic investments in key markets with the objective to bring cost-effective capacity for the consumers, with partnering with the local in-country players. Angola, for sure, is a focus market. And overall, our objective is to continue play pivotal role in Ka-band space and in the EMEA region at this point of time. I think that's what, that's how I would like to summarize what opportunities are and how we are going to move forward in the next 5 years. Thanks.
Thanks, Dharmendra. That was great. Patrick, would you like to jump in with a quick introduction of yourself, your company, and maybe the opportunities and drivers over the next 5 years for ABS?
Yeah, sure. So actually, it's kind of funny. While this is called the Regional Satellite Operators Voice Session, ABS really views ourselves as a global satellite operator. We have a fleet of 6 satellites. So 4 of those are really our prime satellites, which provide coverage of about 92% of the global population, primarily in wide beam C and KU band. Now, actually, ABS is no longer known as Asia Broadcast Satellite. It is ABS. The Asia reference was very intentionally dropped from the name because of that view of being a global operator. Of course, global in terms of reach, but in terms of scale, in number of fleet, the size of our fleet, the revenues, etc., we certainly are in league with the other people on this panel and what people in the industry would typically see as a regional operator. And I think that way we also have a lot of the advantages that operators of our size do, and of course some of the challenges we all face. In terms of looking forward, ABS is in a bit of a good position. We all know about the difficulties that the world is facing, not only us satellite operators and all through the value chain, but the entire world. But very fortunately for ABS, of our total fleet of 6 satellites, but the 4 key ones, we've launched 3 new satellites within the last 5 years, which effectively doubled our total in-orbit capacity and marketable capacity. And frankly, our number one focus has been for the last few years and going forward is really to focus, to emphasize and to sell what we have in space. So, all the time I'm getting people coming up to me or my colleagues, hey, when's ABS launching this next satellite? Of course, we're always looking at new satellite opportunities if the business case makes sense. But in these days, we're actually quite happy that the main thing that we need to get done is selling what we have and then looking and keeping our eyes open for the right opportunity, right partnership, which we could jump in as needed, but we're not obliged to do that.
Great, thanks for that. Wael, would you like to introduce yourself and share a bit of background on Arabsat as well as a little bit of a forward look at the opportunities you see in the next 5 years?
Yes, my name is Wael, but I'm running after the commercial department in Arabsat. I've been working with Arabsat like more than 15 years, and Arabsat was founded in 1976 by the 21 states of Arab countries. We are working under the Arab League umbrella. We have been working like 40 years to serve the Arab world. We do have much better understanding on the Arab countries. And on top of that, we are operating right now 10 satellites in the region. 3-4 years back, we acquired Helasat, which is a Greece company, just to go and expand more in Europe after having the coverage on the Middle East and Africa. Different satellite, different coverage we are operating. The most attractive things nowadays in Arabsat that, okay, we are now in the phase of changing or replacing the fleets that we do have. And recently, we just signed for the new satellite, which is a couple of months ago, for replacing 2 satellites. Having said that, I think the opportunity that we are looking here in the market still in the Arab region or the MENA in specific, there is a good opportunity. There is a sustained good business and for the normal bands for coverage. And also Arabsat is looking after to have for the KA band and for the HTS, which actually it's like a good opportunity to serve the Arab countries, which is part of ArabSat. Overall, it's good. There is a potential in the market. And also maybe the political issues, it's helping sometimes with going to have the communication.
Thanks, Wael. So I think that was a great backgrounder on all of your companies and yourselves. And so maybe now we can bridge into our first kind of question about the geostationary satellite technology and the associated business models. So we've noted, and yourselves have noted probably as well in the industry, kind of a shift towards smaller or more flexible satellites in terms of the capacity, leveraging some of the peripheral trends like lower launch costs as well as electric propulsion. So I was just wondering what your view on this was and whether it's relevant for your organization. So Dharmendra, would you like to start us off?
Yeah, sure, Brent. Well, I think it's good to have these advancement in the technology when it comes to the satellite part of it, and this shift is really relevant and helps satellite operators, all of us actually, not just YASAT, basically to offer cost-effective capacity to customers where actually they need it. Many a times you design a satellite, start designing a satellite 3 years in advance, and by the time you have it in orbit, the scenario on the ground changes. So these flexibilities basically offer, a lot of flexibility. It all started, I believe, long time back when with the capability to design steerable beam came up, and now these flexibilities are taking that to a next level, wherein we can actually play with the frequency configurations. We can allocate power where we need it more. We can actually change coverage, and that all is possible, even after the spacecraft is in orbit, and we can move some capacity around. So these are really positive advancement in the industry, and these capabilities basically help satellite operators like us to, adapt to the evolving market needs. Customer keep changing their business models. Customer keep changing their geographic the focus when it comes to the market perspective, and so we can adapt and we can serve where they want. It's not on the fly, but yes, we can work together and get the customer needs addressed, change needs addressed, I would say, right? And it also, depending on what who's manufacturing, what features are there in your satellite, it also allows progressive deployment of associated ground segment and gateways, so which actually helps satellite operators put their investments at the right time, at the right stages. And of course, lower launch costs, everybody wants that. It enables many small and regional satellite operators, I'll not call us small, but yeah, regional small satellite operators, to launch payloads specific to regional needs and still have much lower risk factor. So it really helps. Talking about the, if you talk about even, here we are going to have life extension services. That's also coming up, and that's really interesting. Fortunately, our fleet is really young today, and we are not in a need of that service. But when the time comes, probably it will make a lot of sense to people like us. I think that's my view on this. Thanks. Back to you, Brent.
Thanks, Dharmendra. That's an interesting note on life extension services. So we'll maybe touch on that as well with the other panelists. But Wael, would you? ArabSat has started its next generation procurement plan with the recent procurement of a satellite from Airbus. Are there some of these new technologies or flexibility in there? And what does ArabSat think going forward about some of these key geostationary technologies and whether you'll adopt them, including potentially life extension services?
Thank you. Definitely, I can say that okay, I am in agreement with Dharmendra, but the issue is also depends on the business case of the satellite, what we're looking for. For example, in ArabSat, we just look after, for example, for the new satellite. just to go with the option, or is it the small one or the big GEO satellite? At the end of the day, it's based on what is required and what is to be the specification on the satellite will help us at the end of the day to determine which business case it would be. To be honest with you, from my experience that we just passed like 1 year ago, is going with the big satellite. It's sometimes from a business point of view, from a business case, it's more reliable than the small, because it depends on, from my experience, I can say it depends on the specification that you are looking to add on this satellite. I do agree in certain area, like for example, if I go for the HTS, for example, satellite, maybe it will work perfectly there if you apply the right business case on that, and it will help you. In another area also, you can say that it will help for the national satellite that we can find it all over. They can help you to have a much better business case to help them to go and move forward. From that perspective, but definitely, I do agree that, okay, in the coming future, that the things will be coming a more suitable for the business by having them faster and reactive. Because, you know, the satellite business is took like from 7, the life cycle from 7 to 15, and this is, and also now it's more and more. And this is really needs something that to recap the technology, because each year and year there's a new technology, and you need really to look after the requirement in the market and to look after your customer, and definitely to figure out the exact solution that will help you in the future.
Thanks, Wael. Patrick, so, you know, you've mentioned ABS's fleet is extremely young as well. So, you know, I know that there had been possibly a consideration for a larger HTS satellite. How does, you know, you described a little bit about it in the introduction, but how does ABS look at, you know, some of these potential technologies looking forward with respect to size of satellites or the flexibility? Is this a must-have for you to procure another satellite, given that the fill rates on the existing fleet top up a little bit to satisfactory levels?
Well, again, ABS, we're always looking at opportunities for growth. And I would like to actually say one of the advantages of operators, regional or of our scale, is, you know, a good deal, you know, 20, 30, 40, $50 million deals are still very attainable in our industry today, despite everything. But for our scale, those deals can really push the needle and change our company's trajectory. But if you look at a large GEO satellite operator, that type of money really doesn't change the trajectory too much for their growth, okay? So in terms of operators of our scale, these are very good and very interesting opportunities for us. Hence, we are very much looking at them. And in particular, over the course of 2019 and into the early part of 2020, we did a very in-depth look at what we internally call VSGEO, a very small GEO. So this would be a fairly straightforward geostationary platform of the scale of, in terms of like transponder count, say from 6 to 20 or 24 classical transponders, you know, maybe about in the 12 would be kind of like a typical average. Or if you're looking at HTS, maybe a 20 to 80 gig type range, you know, bus power, DC bus power, maybe a 1.5 to 3 kilowatts, so somewhere in this range. So the reason we're looking at this particular area is we believe from a business perspective, the size payloads you have, you can slot these into niches of very specific demand and take advantage of that. Now, in the past, satellite operators, when you were trying to drive down the cost of either a transponder procured or a gigabit procured, up until very recently, the main lever you had to do that, honestly, was go big, right? But the problem with having a big satellite, and I've been saying this for years, is, yeah, sure, on a cost side, you can drive down the cost per transponder per gig, but you know, you got to sell all that capacity also to really make the business case work. And if you're, you know, if there's any question on your business plan, if you're trying to fill hundreds and hundreds of gigabits of capacity, you know, you better have a really solid business plan. So Where this VSGEO becomes really interesting is you can get economies in a per transponder cost or per gig cost equivalent to a very large geostationary satellite. And we actually ran an RFI process. We got a bunch of both traditional and new manufacturers who submitted proposals, and we did the analysis, and we found several potential opportunities that would work, okay, from a cost side. That said, there's still a challenge. So, whether it's a very large or a VSGEO, very small geo type platform, if you're getting an equivalent cost per transponder per gig, that's great. But you still need to sell that capacity. And I think one of the challenges we're all seeing is on the pricing side and all of that, whether on a small VSGEO, your payload is still smaller. So you still need to be confident you can get the revenue stream that will still close your business case. And I think that's where in a classic build it and they will come type model, even a VSGEO still has challenges. So the other side, the other aspect of what we're doing with the VSGEO effort is targeted, but also looking for partnership opportunities to bring in and really tie everything together. And I think this is the particular advantage of looking in this area. And this is what we're focused on at the moment. I will note that you mentioned flexibility before. One thing that our RFI did look at is we've yet to see a very highly flexible geostationary satellite in a small configuration, okay? You can certainly get flexibility and cost-effective flexibility. Of course, there's many ways to define flexibility. We won't go there yet, but in a larger geostationary platform. But we haven't really seen in a really small geostationary platform the fully flexibility nut to be cracked. So, if you're trying to put in a fully software programmable payload where you can move beams around and all that, we haven't yet seen a good solution in a really small type platform. Oh, will it come? Hopefully one day, hopefully not too far in the future. But that's not there yet today, in our view, at least.
And sorry, Patrick, just to follow on, you mean some of the new FlexSats or reprogrammable satellites with digital payloads, they're coming in, at the 3-ton category. This for you would be small, not very small. That's to make the difference.
Very small, because again, it comes into 3-ton category. But when you look at the cost per gig or the cost per, again, transponders, maybe not the best. It's the classic way we think of it, but it's maybe not the best way to think of it for these new satellites. The price per whatever unit is, especially the cost per unit when you procure the satellite compared to the revenues, it still can be difficult. It can still be difficult to close business cases.
Certainly.
i.e., flexibility comes at a cost. So unless you have very confidence in your business case and the revenues coming in, it comes at a cost.
Yeah. Thanks, Patrick. I think you touched on an important point there, that some of the scale and the efficiency achieved in lowering the cost per bit has been through going big, right? Multiplying the number of beams, or on the NGSO side for prospective entrants, it's multiplying the number of satellites to achieve scale. This clearly causes an issue with respect to the traditional wholesale leasing model, where you've got to find customers in all these beams absent flexibility, right? So that's where we've kind of seen a trend in line with adoption of HTS technologies within the fleets, of a move more towards the end users with respect to introducing managed services or adopting managed services. Dharmendra, Yasat from the start had this model with YaClick where, as opposed to just a wholesale capacity lease to your service providers, you've approached the end users by putting together some packages and to try to achieve scale that can be replicated across your footprint. Can you talk to us a little bit about how you guys see managed services versus wholesale capacity leasing model, Dharmendra?
Yeah, sure. I think Yahclick primarily, looking at major successes in the western part of the world, and we were probably one of the first ones to look at that and see that if that same can be replicated here, and we can look at offering managed services, and that's how this whole Yahclick service. And we started with Alia 2, which is a Ka band capacity, and Alia 3, which is again a Ka band capacity. And we all know, right, exactly, that whole nature of the business is changing rapidly. And gone are those days where a traditional VSAT operator would go to a satellite operator and buy capacity in megahertz, and then go to an equipment provider and buy inexpensive hardware, and then also take all the pain in acquiring the land and setting up the dedicated teleports. And more and more, service providers, in-country service provider on ground, they looked at, owning the main value chain, and main value chain is the sales and support, owning the customer, and then partner with somebody who can take risk. And that's where, this whole managed services and selling an MBPS model, sharing some of the risk and helping the end customers move and focus on acquiring the customers and reselling. So that's where, the new trend where buying MBPS directly from the satellite operator. And what that means, then satellite operator really need to invest in ground systems, and that's what we did. And as much as we are agnostic to that, we selected some really good, highly dense systems, which could process a lot of megahertz cost effectively, and then we could sell this MBPS, capacity on wholesale model primarily to the local service providers. But that's actually not the only thing which will work. So that's not the only business model work, and that's the model where you have somebody who quickly want to adopt and maintain only the value chain, which is sales and support. So from our side, while that is our primary focus on Yahclick side, we are actually focusing on Yahclick and doing this MBPS service model. This is even important in rural deployment, right? And rural deployments where if you see the multiple small integrators bag multiple projects, and a large project is very rarely given to one particular service provider, then what that means that probably 10,000 sites being serviced by 4 operators, 2,500 sites each. And should they be deploying 4 different teleport and servicing the market? No. So that's when really they come to us, people like us, and where they just, or they just buy that on MBPS wholesale model, and then they service the customer, and they focus on having their niche in faster rollouts, cost-effective support, better support to the end customer, and then they give that pain of, bits per hertz performance, what equipment, hardware to select, investment in teleports, etc., to our end, right? So, funding is always challenge in absence of scale, and when these projects are distributed across multiple operators, they always look at somebody who can come and take risk. So that model has been really successful for us. And these guys are also very fast learning the model of selling independently and then supporting or rolling out in collaboration with the help of people like us and Arabsat and other people, satellite operator. It's not only us. It's not a secret sauce anymore. Everybody, not just the regional operators, even the global operators are adapting the same model, trying to invest in equipment and gateways either globally, and some of them are actually, including us, focusing on putting up gateways in, markets where the maximum revenue comes from. And it makes sense because then you mitigate many challenges, licensing challenges, that many a time you cannot serve a particular application or a particular, which may be driven by the government through a off-country gateway. So yes, we are focused in doing managed services, offering MBPS models. That doesn't mean that's the only model we are focusing on, and that is yielding result in many markets. That's my view on this.
Thanks, Dharmendra. I'd just like to remind all the attendees that we do have a question and answer function in the Zoom call on the Zoom platform. So please feel free to upload your questions, and we'll try to get to them a little bit later in the discussion. But maybe just bridging right to Patrick with respect to ABS, and what have you guys been doing to either get closer to the end users, help them close the business case, or drive utilization of your fleet with respect to more managed services as opposed to wholesale capacity leasing?
Okay, so do I have 2 hours to talk about this? So in terms of ABS side, of course, we are doing managed services and looking at that and looking to expand. So I'm not going to just repeat what everyone else is going to say. But I would like to give just for the audience some reflections and some things to try and chew on and think about that. I think as an industry, we tend to throw around the word managed services a little bit too easily and a little bit too blithely. So, you have to think of managed services as kind of a scale, or at least people use the term, but when they're thinking about it, it goes across a scale of things. So on one very end, it might mean to them a managed service. So yes, we do a managed service, but all they might be really doing is, instead of selling megahertz to a client, the client is actually asked pricing in megabits per second. So yes, we manage our megahertz, we convert it, and we sell it to you in a megabit per second. And that's kind of one end of managed services. Then there's a whole slew of different more and more things you can add on, just as Dharmendra was asking. Then you can go all the way up to the other end of maybe a completely verticalized type product offering, satellite broadband in the US, where someone calls up, I want broadband at my house up in the mountains. So someone shows up, installs the dish, everything, the billing, everything. I mean, that's fully verticalized, and that's a managed service also. So I think the thing to think of is when you're a satellite operator, whether you're regional or global or big or small, you really have to think very hard on where do you want to go into that whole spectrum of manage, which fits your capabilities, what you're willing to do, and where, importantly, you think you can succeed financially. Because, again, I won't go on for 2 hours, but I do want to make another point in the quote-unquote managed service area, which is we're all doing it. We're all trying to figure it out. But there's a thing which I don't think we talk about enough about what managed services mean. And I just go back a little bit in history and I explain what I'm trying to get at for this point. Does anyone here out there in the audience remember the good old days when everyone was complaining about, oh, you rich satellite operators, you make so much money with your 70, 80% EBITDA margins. You're not sharing all that money. That's not fair. It's not fair, right? Remember those days? Wish we could get them back, but okay. But there's two fallacies with that, even back then, and especially now, that I just want to point out, and I'll tie that into the managed services. Even in those days when they use 70, 80% of EBITDA margins, it wasn't so much the satellite operators were rich. It's just the nature of the business we do. You need a very high EBITDA margin in order to have the cash flow in order to invest in that next satellite. If you didn't have a high EBITDA margin, you wouldn't get the cash and you couldn't buy the follow-on satellite. So, EBITDA margins is always a kind of a red herring to look at. You should really look at return on invested capital, which even back in the days of the high EBITDA margins, our industry was good, but it was nothing spectacular. When you talk about and here's the tie-in to managed service, and everyone's saying, oh, we got to do managed service. yes, you have to go down the managed service path. No one's denying that. But when you go down the managed service path, de facto, your margins are going to have to go down. Why are they going down? Because you have to do a lot more to support the client, and you're bearing a lot more of the cost. Whether it's capital cost and equipment on the ground, or more people and personnel in order to do that and give a product or a service that the client wants, it costs more money to do that. Your margins go down. But guess what? Generally speaking, price of a satellite has not, a new satellite that follow on has not come down as fast. One of the reasons we're looking at the VSGEOs also, but that's an aside. So the industry needs to think, okay, as us as satellite operators go into the managed service, I would posit that we don't really think of how does that really generate the cash flows in order to make sure that we can build those follow-on satellites, make those big capital investments. We say we want flexible satellites, but our, flexible satellites, as I said earlier, are not necessarily a whole lot cheaper. Yes, they provide more flexibility, but in terms of invested capital, are they cheaper? Does ABS have the solution here? No, I'm not saying we do yet. Are we looking at it, trying to figure it out? I think everyone's trying to figure it out. But again, I don't think everyone's asking the right questions when they're looking at managed services and just saying, oh, yes, of course we do it. We want to do it because it's good for clients. I think we really need as an industry to understand more what we mean by this. And at the end of a day, does a managed service really get us to the point financially where we are on a good track for our companies? Again, I don't have the answers, but I think these are the questions we as an industry, we as satellite operators need to ask ourselves a lot more and be a lot more serious about looking at these questions.
It's a great point, Patrick. And maybe bridging over to Wael, you at Arabsat have recently pushed in more into managed services. On my side, particularly, we note Arabsat broadband on some of your HTS assets, whether it be Batter 7 or the recently launched Arabsat 6A. Was moving a little bit more into managed services a prerequisite to help commercialize this capacity, or did you guys have a choice there, and what was some of the thinking behind it?
I think what my colleague already just mentioned, there is a good point that has been raised on all these things. And top of that, also from Arabsat perspective, or from Arabsat view, that we started like for the Badr 7, as you mentioned, it's kind of one way to go to managed service or to go down to the verticals. However, but we put into our consideration that, okay, if I'm going to go down to the vertical, I'm going to compete with my existing customers. So it's a kind of something that you need to manage in between. So we decided, for example, in Badr 7, to go with a way that, okay, we'll be only building the hubs and we will promote the service on the ground, which is split, helping them to make it more easier for them. Having said that, because specifically, if you go to the broadband, on top of what my colleague just mentioned, there is also one point which is very important. The regulatory in each and every country needs more and more works to be done in that. So we go with another idea, is just to go to build the broadband from scratch for the country itself, based on their requirement and specification. So it will be like kind of small hosted payload on the satellite, which provide them with the high throughput satellite based on their configuration and the need that they're looking for, which at the end of the day will be converted to be a broadband that helps the country in specifically. And we have been succeeded right now, for example, 3 or 4 countries in the Arab world, we just closed with them such a kind of option, which from my point of view, I can say that it's very successful. You encourage them from the beginning, from the design of the the satellite, you put them all the solutions. So at the end of the day, it will be helping them big time while they start providing the broadband. And you can use partnering this kind of things with the existing service provider in the country, which they know much better than any satellite operator on the ground.
Oh, that was great, Weil. Thank you. We do have some questions trickling in from the audience, so I'll jump right in there, guys. Fred Morris is asking all participants here, have you guys noticed an uptick in trunking demand as a market vertical? Maybe Patrick, do you want to start us off? I mean, you have some nice C-band capacity in some interesting areas where trunking may still be a decent market, but what's your view on that?
Yeah, so good question. Thank you, Fred. I'll be honest. I mean, of course, ABS offers trunking services. You have to define exactly what you mean by trunking. In my mind, trunking tends to be large point-to-point links. So assuming that's what you're referring to, we do offer that, though based on feedback from our sales team, I have not necessarily seen a huge growth in that area. Now, if you're referring to, say, trunking more in the terms of like backhauls, more in the backhaul towards area, of course, that's there and that's growing, and again, certain markets are very good for that.
Great. Dharmendra, have you guys at Yasat seen any uptick in whether it be trunking or backhaul for more mobile network operators and the remote e-nodes in Africa? You know, possibly in line with the launch of Aliyah 3 a couple of years ago.
I think it is in more recent trend. Majority of the requirements when it comes to the enterprise networks, as I earlier pointed out, are driven through social inclusion programs from the government side. And when government goes to these mobile network operators and remind them for their promise of, covering 95% of the entire country, that's when they remember about satellite operators. So that's when they come down to satellite operators and look for, cost-effective solutions. And that is primarily driving a lot of rural GSM networks and requirements coming to people like us, all of us, right? And trunking requirements are taking a lot of uptake for two reasons. In the past, when you talk about trunking, there were only satellite capacity is one part. The equipment which was needed, as Patrick pointed out, to connect two locations point to point was extremely expensive, right? The upfront cost was huge. And now a lot of these technologies, like one of our partner, Hughes Network Systems, and other people, everybody, I believe, every equipment partner has gone and advanced their, equipment where the cheaper remote terminals can give you return of like 100 meg on a $5,000 modem. You can get 100 meg return. So you can call it trunking or you can call it cellular backhauling. Then suddenly a network which needed $300,000 to even think about that, forget about the capacity, is changing. So that now people have started thinking about backup networks like these MNOs to give higher uptime to end users. That means higher, number of calls. They want to back up each of their terrestrial site using some kind of alternate, and the best suited and quickly deployable one is satellite. And I really agree with the question which asked. In last 3-4 months, we have quoted to at least 10 different requirement of trunking. And of course, we don't get into that market of doing trunking beyond 100/100, right? We limit ourselves to that so that we can cost effectively deliver that, whether it is for rural GSM or it is for the trunking. Suddenly, there is an uptake, and I would say every third, fourth requirement is for trunking for us. And we see in next 3-4 years, that trend will continue till these mobile network operators end up covering, as per their commitment to the governments. So that's my view on that. Thanks, man.
Those are great insights, Dharmendra. While I have a question for you, I mean, it was a legacy business for Arabsat trunking. It was a difficult position over the maybe not necessarily recent past, but I'm wondering whether after this, do you see the trunking market as it was defined previously in structural decline and more the uptick recently has been in mobile network operator backhaul and USO projects, or is there requirements that you've seen recently with respect to the traditional trunking large pipes point to point coming back?
Yes, I can see because specifically in the region, in the Arab region, there is some countries still you don't have the infrastructure that helps them to do such a thing. So still the demand is there. Still the thing that can we help and go with further with them. As my colleague says, the rural areas still they need the connectivity, which is really right now a big demand on the connectivity. Still they are looking on such kind of things. I do agree with my colleagues. I don't, I can share with them the same feedback. However, that okay, there is quoted several things, and there is a demand in the region from this kind of service.
Perfect. So we have another question from Adnan Siddiqui, who's noticed massive growth in wireless communications. Interference has become a significant issue. He's curious to understand what your biggest challenges are with respect to interference at the moment, and how you guys plan to deal with it. While I know that this was partly a driver of some of the technology procured on your recent satellites, and that it has been an issue in the past for you. So I'll turn the question to you first, and then to the other panelists after.
Yes, actually, we have go through several occasions of interference. Some of them it's kind of direct interference, or from the others that it's kind of rumors. So we just implemented and we do like the new technology or the new kind of things that we go with the Ka band, go with the Ku band, which limit the number of people that can interfere through the coverage area. So while you make the areas smaller, so the things that you can limit the people from doing interference, because we have several occasions that has been done through certain countries, certain on certain TV channels, so they can go with start jamming on the satellite. So we just defined in our new satellite for the Badr 7, which is like 2 years ago, a technology that helps the direct-to-home people that to prevent their channels or their communication in general to be jammed, which we call it anti-jamming solution. Goes from Ka band and go down to downlink by Ku band, which is normal. Everybody can receive it and can do it. This is one part of it. And also, I think the Ka band nowadays is kind of limited the jamming and the interference that happens with this kind of solution.
Would anyone else like to chime in about interference with respect to their companies?
I'll just make a quick comment. I mean, there's interference, and there's interference. There's many types of interference we deal with in our industry. Intentional, unintentional, between satellites, from the ground, etc. So it keeps people very busy. I just won't go into this for too long, but I think one particular interference that ABS finds particularly frustrating is not intentional, but unintentional interference coming from the ground, like say radars or military radars or things like that. And I just point this out because I don't think it's just ABS, but I think it's an industry problem. Where that issue is for us when we see these in specific transponders and stuff like that, makes it, that capacity, even if for us it's perfectly good capacity, we can't market that capacity because we know that at any time someone could turn on a radar and it starts getting our clients upset. And so what happens for us is we have to take that capacity off the market until we find that the interference is gone for a long enough time we feel confident we can put it back on. But I think as an industry, and this is just a challenge to the industry as a whole, because I think all of the operators have to deal with this, is while between satellite operators, between satellites, we're very good at addressing interference, I think as an industry of trying to address with this intermittent terrestrial type interference, we still don't have a lot of good solutions to do that. And frankly, a lot of people just on the ground don't want to admit that it's us or them. I mean, not us, but them. And it's a real big challenge. I think that particular type of interference to deal with. So again, to the person who asked the question, I don't know exactly what type of interference you were thinking of, because there's a lot of different types. But I think that's one which, again, collectively as an industry, is one which I think we need to try and address better.
Okay.
Okay, I think my fellow panelists have covered this adequately when it comes to the technological interference. The only one interference which I'm worried about as a sales guy is an interference from competitor with better proposals. So I'm just working on that. Busy working on that.
Dharmendra, that ties in pretty well with a couple of questions we have about competition. One of them from Steve R, and I'll kind of from Eddie Cato to all the panelists, and I'll kind of roll it up with another question that was a similar topic. So what are your key differentiators as regional operators, or, you're multi-regional operators in the case of ABS and everybody here, but how do you guys compete with country-specific operators or national operators that are government-backed and global operators? So what areas do you guys need to focus on to win, compete against the scale of global operators, or maybe the in-country insights and connections that national operators have? Patrick, maybe I'll turn it to you. It's an interesting question for ABS. You're involved across a lot of different geographies with both large and national operators.
Yeah, so thanks, Eddie, for that question. Hope you're well. So I would argue that the majority of the industry that we all address in is a very regional industry. Very little of the demand and the clients that we get. I mean, some maybe, I hate to put a percent on it, 10, 20% of the revenues might be really for something you could classify as a global or a large scale type of service. The vast majority, I would argue, and this is for everyone, whether you're an Intelsat SES or the smallest one satellite operator out there, most of your clients are very regional, very focused on what they need. Okay. So I think the way you differentiate and the way you address is you go and first establish very good relationships with the client that you want to work with, number one. Number two, I mean, it's obvious for us to provide a good technical solution, but you also need to go in and look at all the regulatory issues, the landing rights. If you're doing, again to the famous managed service area, can you actually bring equipment into the country, sorry. There's all the importation and type certificate type things that you need to deal with. Can you help them install it? Can you help them manage it? If it goes wrong, can you fix the equipment? So I think what you do is you pick the markets where you feel comfortable that you bring the capabilities in where you can complete successfully. And I would argue in that case, in most cases, scale doesn't matter, whether it's the smallest one satellite operator going against the biggest 50 satellite operator. If you target on a specific opportunity, specific market, specific client, and you can bring all those pieces together, the client will appreciate that and they will recognize that, and that's how you win and succeed.
I think that's a very fair point, Patrick, and maybe Dharmendra, in the sense that global operators operate across your footprint, for example, in Africa or MENA, but you were one of the first to bring actual Ka-band HTS capacity into those markets. So, I mean, that I suppose could be considered a differentiator, but is there any particular thoughts you have on this topic as well?
I think, among the regional operators, when it comes to, competition among the regional operators, then, customers pretty much decides on, of course, you have to do the sales effort, but ultimately customer picks up the service based on business criticality, service availability requirements, and to some extent, price. And that's where we fellow regional operators actually compete. And of course, each of the designs, whether it's us or ABS or Arabsat, we have our own niche to that. But An area where we feel the heat, direct heat from the global operators is when there is a large requirement of global services, like for an example, Ministry of Foreign Affairs wanting to connect embassies across hundreds of the countries. That's where we feel the heat. But I think we mitigate that to some extent by doing some strategic partnerships, which is reciprocatory in the nature, and we depend on our partner capacities to address that, and our capability to deliver and connect most of such sites on our network, helps us, cross subsidize, wherein we use partner capacities in such cases. So competition will always be there, and I personally feel that helps us be on our toes and adapt to the customer requirements. But yeah, there are certain areas which we feel the heat from the competition. Similarly, they also are challenged many a time when put in front of us.
Thank you. While Arabsat is a multi-government or intergovernment organization, right? So is this one of the differentiators for you when you go to a local market that is within your organization with capacity versus a global operator, let's say?
Definitely. As I mentioned at the beginning in the introduction, that Arabsat is the main idea is to help the Arab countries. This is and all the Arab countries governmental, they have been shared with the Arabsat. But this is one part of it. But the main part of making differentiate between the regional or maybe the global, specifically in the region here, in the MENA region, that in specifically Arabsat, we don't push for the solution. We go with the customer and we listen. We understand what kind of services, what the pain that they are looking for. And as I mentioned in different topic, that we engage the customer in the design of the satellite so they can have the best out solution that will help them in the requirement of the solution. Having said also, there is another part of the question which is quite interesting, which is the national satellite operator, this is kind of a competition coming in the market, because recently we heard like 3 or 4, especially in the region, that there is 3 or 4 countries is launching their national satellite. And this is also one of the things that Arabsat is trying to handle. From that point of view, is to go with having a joint or Condosat with them. So that kind of things that helping the Arab countries to have their own national satellite, which is a little bit reducing the competition, which might happen in the region.
Brent, could I make one quick point on this? Dharmendra made me think of it, but I think it's an important element to speak about also on this question. To be quite honest, for ABS at least, some of our best clients are other satellite operators. And, frankly, no matter how big the biggest satellite operator is out there, they don't always have on their fleet all the capacity, all the coverage that they need and meet for their end clients. And, ABS would be perfectly happy if we sold all of our capacity to other satellite operators, because frankly, like I said, they're some of the best clients out there. So thank you, guys. But no, seriously, it's a very interesting industry when you look at it. I mean, you want to talk about competition and fighting, but the other side is very often it's very close collaboration. And again, that's another way to succeed.
Thanks, Patrick. So I know that we're running up against the end of the allotted time for the webinar. I'm just wondering if you guys may be able to stay on a few minutes extra to just treat a few questions here, perhaps 10 minutes or so.
Sure.
Okay. So we've got a couple of questions that I'll kind of combine from anonymous attendees here. The first is basically about the future comparative revenue opportunities between video and data businesses. Do you guys see the revenue opportunity in aggregate being higher for your company for the data side or broadband or video going forward? And maybe for those who have Ka-band capacity on the panel, a follow-on question there is, have you guys seen the demand meet your expectations to date, or is there still work to do there? Maybe we can start. Patrick, would you like to start?
Yeah, I'll make this very short in a sense. That's a really hard question to answer because the reality is video is becoming data and data is becoming video, if you know what I mean. You in the very classic satellite industry, old school thinking, of course, you had your megahertz, which you sold to your media hotbird sites, et cetera. Then you had your VSAT networks. But the reality is a lot of the things, certainly data is getting bigger for everyone in the industry. But what's driving data? What's driving data is getting media and video to devices and what have you. So it's a little bit of a tricky one to answer. I would say in general, if you think of video going over a data stream, then I think it's inevitable that over longer term, data for the entire industry is going to gradually dominate. There'll still be that core market for DTH services and what have you, which will remain. But I think it's unquestionable that data is going to be growing and growing just because all of our consumption of video on devices and what have you is growing and growing.
Yeah, that's fair. And Dharmendra, I'll note that I probably know the answer for you based on the assets that you have and what you've recently launched. But with respect to expectations for the ramp up of the Ka-band capacity, is this more or less in line with expectations?
Yeah, pretty much in line. And I think the only area where we see some requirements coming up is bandwidth or demand for the uplink, video uplink. That's an area where there are some opportunities which are coming up. Otherwise, primarily our focus has been and the demand is majority from the data perspective. That's where the focus is.
Okay, and Wael, with respect to Arabsat's Ka-band, and you're a very important video operator with one of the most premium hotspots in the world at 26 East, right? So, your views are interesting here.
Yes, and I can say this specifically, maybe in Arabsat, we do have a 26 hotspot, which is for the direct to home. Giving the answer from that point of view, previously, going back 4 to 5 years, if I can look or analyze the revenue coming from Arabsat, I can say it's 50% going from direct to home from video, and then 50% coming from data or connectivity. Nowadays, okay, from the video point of view, is going less, and the data is going up. So you can give it now the percentage is 55 for data and 45 for the direct to home. So this is, yes, it gives indication that, okay, the direct to home, it's a little bit sustaining, but there is no growth. Because the transition that's happening in the market and the behavior is becoming for the viewers is going toward the data either through satellite or fiber, whatever connectivity that to be connected through the devices that they are connected through.
Okay, thanks. And so we kind of have maybe one last question here. With respect to the regions that you guys serve and your future growth plans, would you expect to potentially expand regionally? And what has been maybe the rationale, or driver behind the previous expansion that you guys have had? Is it basically sort of regulated at the top by access to orbital slots? For ABS, you guys were able to bring into service orbital slots that covered these regions. Was that the driving factor behind kind of becoming global? And maybe for Yasat and Arabsat, do you have aspirations to have a truly global footprint eventually? So maybe we can start with Wael.
Yes, actually, from Arabsat perspective, we started with the orbital location. We have been expand from the orbital location, and also 4 years ago, we just acquired Helasat, which is now its sister company to Arabsat, which is going further and expanding in Europe to have more coverage over Europe. Or going back even more from our expansion strategy and plan, we also expand several years ago in Africa, which wasn't our market. So we started with the MENA. So, and after that goes to the Africa and now go to Europe by several points, which is either by orbital location or the second one by acquiring another satellite operator to be more and more expanding globally.
Great. And Dharmendra, any thoughts on this topic?
I think if you look at our capacity, which is primarily focused at Middle East and Africa, now, Asia was, the talk when you talk about globally, the market coming up, and to some extent that is getting where it should be now. Everybody's looking at Africa, right? So if you look at our capacities, AY2, AY3, and we also have exclusive access to some other capacities, which I can't talk about. With that, we have enough capacity at that point of time over Africa. And once we monetize that and we reach a stage where we really need to expand, I think we have financial, backing to quickly, go ahead and augment that capacity initially through strategic alliances and then with dedicated capacity. And I think we are very well placed where world is now looking towards Africa, and we have enough capacity over Africa. And thankfully, we have, we have right plan, and we are working on, as you talked about, the managed services solution, and people are, taking that off. So I'm sure that will push us towards expansion in future. But at this point of time, I think we have enough capacity in the right market where we are operating in.
Great. And Patrick, I know you mentioned the consideration for the very small geo satellite. Would this be at a new slot or within your existing footprint, and just in general on expansion plans, or I mean, you're pretty well covered already.
Well, again, ABS, to a certain extent, to the slots and to a very not certain sense, but definite strategic plan. The intention was to become a global operator. And for the VSGOs, those will be slotted in either at existing or new slots, depending on the business case. But, I'll just say, because I saw this question pop up a few times also in the chats, I mean, a global strategy or a regional strategy or even a country-focused strategy, I don't think necessarily one is better than the other. I think it really depends on what the operator feels is right for itself, the history of the operator, etc. I'll just take a very quick example. ABS has gone global, but you look at another like NSIL in India, very, very much a country-focused operator with no intention, at least today, of going beyond that market. Is one right? Is one wrong? I don't know. I just really think a lot has to do with the history, the origin, and the intention, strategic direction that each operator wants to go.
Well, thanks, Patrick. Yeah, thanks a lot, Patrick. So I think we've covered a lot of ground here, guys, on a lot of different topics, and we've gotten through the questions from the audience. So I'd like to thank our esteemed panelists for participating today, for the audience's interaction, and just to say that recording of the session will be available soon on the GVF website, so you can watch it back or refer others to it. And for future webinars of GVF, please visit gvf.org. And the next webinar in the series is going to be on November 5th at the same time, 3 p.m. UK, 10 a.m. Eastern time, on humanitarian assistance and disaster response. And I'd just like to wrap it up by thanking our supporting sponsor, Proactive International PR. And thank you again to all the panelists, Patrick, Dharmendra, and Wael.